Milk hot dogs, potato, I muttered to myself, dragging my feet down the aisles of Walmart. It had been a rough day. My head refused to work and my concentration was at zero. I was dead tired but hungrier than ever. At home, the fridge was empty as if no one had ever lived there. With this job, I got nothing done and it was all for nothing. They'll definitely fire me, I thought gloomily and trudged to the third aisle for ketchup. I worked as an assistant manager in a small company in Chicago. Minimum wage, maximum demands, and constant contemptuous looks from the boss. All the dirty work was dumped on me. I had just graduated from college, and I didn't have rich parents who could help me get ahead. My mom had spent her whole life working as a cashier in a small supermarket on the south side, barely making ends meet. I never knew my father, he had died before I was born. I had a stepdad, and for me, the question of my biological father was closed. It was easier that way for everyone. Mom never spoke about him, and I didn't try. I knew it was hard for her, and I had no reason to dig into the past. So I had to do everything myself. Study for straight A's, sacrificing parties and friends, fight for scholarships on my own, finish college and find a job alone. Only later did I realize that grit and brains mattered far less than connections and money. While I was cramming and taking exams, my classmates were being placed by their parents into top positions at major companies, and their diplomas were barely worth looking at. And here I was, working 12 hours a day. Even at home, my thoughts were all about work. No time for relationships, seeing friends maybe once a year. I kept trying to grab onto something in life, but, well, it was mediocre at best. I kept wandering through the store, replaying these grim thoughts for the hundredth time in my head, when I almost ran into a man. "Sorry," I muttered, glancing at him. He wore an old-fashioned beige suit, the kind people wore in the late 90s. His face was gray, his eyes dull, as if covered by a film. He stared at me without blinking, smiling. "Sorry, didn't mean to," I repeated, hoping this strange guy would at least nod or mumble something like, "It's okay." But he didn't move. He just stared at me with that eerie smile as if it were glued to his face. I awkwardly squeezed past him. A chill ran down my spine. Weird guy, I thought, quickening my pace, wishing I could get home as fast as possible. I rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. Neighborhoods like mine were called bad neighborhoods here, and for good reason. The apartment looked more like a storage closet, but the rent was cheap, though even $700 a month was too much for me. At home, an unmade bed awaited, another fight at the neighbor's place, and a thick layer of dust covering everything except my desk. I sighed heavily and promised myself I'd clean up over the weekend. Yeah, right. The thought flickered through my mind. Most likely, I'd end up working again. I went to the kitchen, quickly fried some potatoes, wolfed them down without tasting a thing, and collapsed onto the bed. How much longer can I keep going like this? The thought ran through my head before I sank into a heavy, meaningless sleep. My whole night was haunted by nightmares. My boss with mountains of reports, shouting, ringing phones, and that weird guy from the store. In the dream, he was standing there again, staring at me with that disgusting, glued-on smile. His head and shoulders seemed dusted with dirt, and worms swarmed in his eyes. After a night like that, I woke up completely wrecked. "Good morning," I muttered to myself and started getting ready. Coffee, cigarette, clothes, keys. In the subway, I was nodding off even while standing 5 more stops to work, and it felt like a truck had run me over. Then suddenly, the sleep vanished like it had never been there. I let out a startled yelp. In the next car, the same man from the store was leaning against the glass, staring at me without blinking, the same sticky smile plastered on his face. I jostled through the crowd, dashed to the other end of the car, and at the next station I jumped out, gasping, and sank onto a bench. Then I laughed nervously. Come on, it's ridiculous. Why am I scared? Just a guy saw him a second time, that's all. Maybe, I thought, he recognized me from the store and was smiling politely. But the image wouldn't leave my head. At work, of course, I was late. My boss didn't even say anything, just shot me a look full of contempt. The day dragged unbearably. Reports, endless calls, stacks of papers. At one point I felt like I had buried my life under this heap of documents. My mood sank even lower. Lunch, as always, I ate at my desk, coffee and a sandwich, my constant companions. While flipping through a folder and chewing on the dry bread with stale cold cuts, the office phone rang. Maybe I shouldn't answer. I thought my break was technically legal, but I picked it up, imagining my boss's face, thinking he was probably sitting somewhere in an expensive restaurant. At first, there was only a rustling sound. "Hello," I shouted. Silence answered. I hung up. A second later, it rang again. I answered, and this time I heard something. Heavy, wheezing breath with a nasty whistle, as if the person's throat was clogged and they couldn't inhale properly. I froze, unable to speak a word, just listened to that ominous breathing. The breathing on the line was wrong, ragged, wet, like someone trying to breathe through a throat clogged with cloth. For some reason, I could picture the man on the other end grinning. I hung up so fast my hand shook, ran it over my forehead, and mumbled something about going to the bathroom to splash water on my face. Of course it was just my imagination, I told myself. Phone glitches happen, right? That thought should have comforted me. It didn't. The room felt darker. The rest of the workday I was a ghost. Everything slipped through my fingers. I answered to the wrong names, sent emails to the wrong people, mixed up attachments. Right before I left, I managed to spill coffee all over an important folder. My boss saw the mess and called me into his office like a drill sergeant. "Get in here now," his voice full of tired rage. He tore into me about how useless I was, how hard it was to find decent people these days, how hearing me had been an act of desperation. I stood there, red-faced, every protest about unpaid overtime and missed weekends dying on my tongue as he turned away and ended the conversation. I left the office humiliated and seething. At home, I cooked a pot of something cheap. Mac and cheese, because that's what we always had, ate in 5 minutes, and sat staring at the TV for an hour. Hopping noise would bulldoze the day from my head. Midnight came and I crawled into bed, but sleep didn't come. Closed my eyes and that smile was there again, and those dead, gray eyes, veiled like someone had wiped a film over them. Somewhere outside, someone sang the sad, drunken songs that always leaked from the corner bar. The street was suddenly empty, like life had been vacuumed out of it. Then I saw him. Despite the warm night, he stood in that same old suit and trench coat directly beneath my window, looking up. The smile was exactly the same, a carved thing that didn't belong on a living face. Fear hit me like electricity. My body trembled and the cigarette I'd been holding slipped from my fingers. I slammed the door, bolted it, and for a second I didn't know what to do. I dialed 911, hung up, thought better of it, and dialed again. The operator's voice was calm. "What's the problem?" I tried to explain through the kind of hysterical breathlessness that makes you sound ridiculous. There's a man outside. He's been following me. He just stands and stares and he smiles. The operator asked if my life was in immediate danger. I froze. No. Yes. The words tangled and I felt sick at how absurd and pathetic it must sound. I paced, minutes stretching into something metallic. Then quietly I crept to the window and pulled the curtain aside. What I saw froze me all the way through, those dead, glassy eyes inches from the pane, drilled into mine, the smile stretched inhumanly wide. I tried to scream and no sound came. For a long time I couldn't move. The floor felt like it was tilting under me. When I finally ripped the curtain shut and scrambled for the deadbolt, I did the thing I used to do as a kid when monsters hid under my bed. I dove under the covers. Only this monster wasn't a shadow of imagination. He was real. I stayed awake all night, flinching at every noise, sometimes creeping to the window and forcing myself not to look. I was afraid of seeing those eyes and that smile again. By morning, I finally sank into an uneasy sleep, waking only around noon. That's it. It's over, flashed through my mind. Without even brushing my teeth, I threw on the first clothes I could grab and ran out of the apartment. On the subway and on the way to the office, I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every accidental touch. It felt like he was around every corner, but he was. He was nowhere. I reached the office and literally ran into my boss. He sized me up with an icy stare. "You're fired." He didn't even hear my excuses. He just turned and walked away. I had to pack my things in front of the whole office. Dozens of eyes watched me, and not a single one showed sympathy. To hell with all of you, with this job, with this office. And with you too, I muttered angrily, grabbing my papers. But when I stepped outside, I was surprised to feel a strange lightness. Freedom. Right after, I remembered the rent for my tiny apartment in Queens, and that I had no way to pay it now. I had to move back in with my mother into her small Brooklyn apartment. She was happy to have me, but I was suffocating in the cramped space and from how everything had turned out. Sometimes I thought, if it weren't for that man at the window, I wouldn't have overslept, wouldn't have lost my job. Everything would have gone on as before. One evening, after coming back from another failed interview, I heard, "Alex, come here," called my mother. Grumbling, I entered the room. On the TV screen, a news report, smoke rising, shattered windows, a half-burned building. I recognized it instantly. It was the office on Queens Boulevard where I had worked not long ago. Reporters spoke of the explosion, the victims, people trapped under the rubble. "My God, son," whispered my mother, "you could have been there." "So he saved me," I gasped in shock. "Who is he?" my mother asked. And then I told her everything. About the man from the supermarket, from the subway, about the calls, about how he had stood under my window. I had been too scared to say a word before. I thought my mother would decide I'd lost my mind. But now it all poured out at once. When I described his eyes, his smile, and the old-fashioned suit, my mother went pale, gasped, and darted to the shelves above. A minute later, she returned with a yellowed newspaper clipping. I took it and my eyes went dark. The man in the photograph was him. Only his eyes were alive and the smile was warm. Under the photo it read, March 31, 1999. At the age of 30, Alex Johnson passed away suddenly in a tragic accident at the factory where he had worked for 15 years. A devoted son, loving husband, and loyal colleague. His memory will live forever. Mom, who is this? She pressed the clipping to her chest. This is your father, Alex. After his death, I took back my maiden name and registered you under it. I never showed you his photographs before. His face was disfigured and it was frightening. I was afraid it would break you too soon. Only this clipping I kept. We were silent for a long time. Maybe he came to see you when he felt you were in trouble, my mother said quietly. I went to the window, looking down almost instinctively, and I saw him, not the creepy stranger, my father. He was standing there looking at me and smiling. I smiled back at him,